Hello, good people, and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History, where today we enter Chapter 14 of the Book of John, to be continued by Chapter 14 of the Impersonal Life by Joseph Benner, two books that Elvis really loved. He annotated many copies of Joseph Benner's The Impersonal Life. A lot of it resonated with the fourth book of the New Testament, John. And Elvis bridged both of those books onto many other spiritual thoughts and books. And he tried to bring others into this spiritual journey with him. Hi, Monica. Hi, Pamela. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. We're going to get started with a song, and this is Threads and Dreams.
He wore a yellow shirt, black pants in the sun, rode horses through silence, then golf carts for fun. A ranch just 10 miles from the mansion's bright gate, where the myth met the morning and time learned away. George fixed the brickwork, the pipes in the ground, lit BP on shirt where no spotlight was found. Donna kept diaries, snapshots ahead of a father who labored, of a myth made by men. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a crown, just a place to be still when the world spun around. In the hands of the quiet, in the stitch of a scene, he carried the weight of a half-finished dream. The holster was worn, leather was cracked, BP etched in thread, no glory attached. Mike shaped the saddle, the belt and the Lord, so Elvis could ride through a myth he adored. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a crown, just a place singing still, that courage spun out in the mistakes on the sea. We drained the weight of the hearts and his teeth. Snowstorms in March to fairgrounds at night. He chased peace in motion and shadow and light. And Priscilla saw him, silhouette aglow, breathing in twilight, steady and slow. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a throne, just laughter at breakfast, a place to call home. In the hush of the ranch, in the hands of the crew, they found what was real. To you.
Thank you for gathering here at Hillbilly Cat History, where we remember together and listen for the echoes. Today we're going to hear those echoes out of a comic book. We're going to start off with our All Equations at a Glance slide, where I've tried to distill Joseph Benner into verbal equations, something like the annotations that Elvis was writing. He was writing them more in a Joseph Benner style, They had depth and complexity within the annotation. These are cleaner, but because they're simpler, they lack some of that depth, but they try to make it clearer. They try to bring clarity to the text. So one is aligned equals the ability to feel and accept love, and that equals unity. That's the sheep pen, and that's also the underlying fabric of the universe. That's unity. The sheep pen is a reflection here on earth, or the sheepfold is a reflection here on earth of pure unity, what we could think of as real unity. It's reflected in many ways here on earth, but we feel it when we are in our personal sheepfolds, which is meditation or prayer or time spent reading the Bible or time spent in love with the family or with the companionship of friends. All of these things some way reflect a sheepfold. A moment of when it's easier to align, I would think, is the easiest way to think of it. And you might say, well, you can't even get in the sheepfold if you're not aligned. If you seek, and you seek sincerely, then Jesus has said that you are aligned. And that means you would be in there, even if you're still fogged, and you've still got questions, and maybe you're still spinning around, but you're in the sheepfold at certain times. And then we return to this comic book from 1943. Elvis was 8 years old. This is the third comic in the series. We've already been through the first two. Those were printed 1941 and 1942. So it's a very unusual publishing schedule for a comic book. They tend to be bi-monthly in this period or monthly. I think a lot of them tended to be bi-monthly because just the scheduling that it took to get these comics out and the coordination. So it kind of took about 60 days. But if you had a machine that was humming, you had the artist and the letters and the writers, and everything was syncing together along with the actual publishing stuff, the printing. You could do it every 30 days. There were a lot of magazines doing it 30 days. Almost all these comics were printed by magazine companies that were looking to make more money. And so they branched out into this comic book world where it was cheap to pay artists to draw these illustrations, and a lot of this kind of stuff, it didn't get saved. It was a work product. The artist handed it over to the company used it to create the print, and then it was just thrown away in a lot of cases. So this original art that we're looking at, probably gone. Probably all that exists is these images of it that have been colored. The artist would have handed it in black and white. Then somebody would have inked it. He would have actually handed it in pencil. Somebody would have inked it, and then somebody else would have colored it. And the coloring was a process. It's not like you just took a crayon and put it on there. You had to identify for the printer how much of each color of ink to use. And I think this is a 4-color process, meaning that they have the 3 primary colors in black. So I've gone off on a tangent about how these things are actually made, but I think that always informs us about the limitations of the medium, and yet what the artist was able to accomplish. In this particular panel, it says, the rulers meet and counsel how to take Jesus, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar among the people, says one of them. So they wanted to seize Jesus. They're wanting to crucify him. They're trying to figure out a plan. They don't want a riot from the crowd who loves Jesus, so they've got to plan this out carefully. There's a lot of color in this particular panel. I think in this particular issue, the third issue, something had improved in the process, and my guess is it was across the board of comics at the time. Or this particular copy survived better than the other copies we looked at, because this is very bright. There's also some interesting lights that are on the walls in the background. Now, the walls themselves are interesting because they're smooth. And they look like they could be poured concrete. I am assuming there's some kind of stone with some kind of facial layer over top of them that's smooth to look like that, kind of like an adobe. And then there's round pillars. There's 2 round pillars, but they're of different diameters. There's also these lights that are attached to the wall, and they look like they're made out of stone. At least the holders do, and they appear to have glass. Like a real lantern, like we would think of today. I don't know if that's supposed to be glass or that's supposed to be empty space, but I'm assuming there's got to be a flame in there, and I have no idea how they're feeding that flame. They don't have any electricity. They don't have any gas pipes. It really looks like a gas lantern, like you would have seen in the late 1800s on top of a tall pole in London. In this panel, it says, "Meanwhile, Jesus has supper at the house of Simon the leper in Bethany." And we talked about this yesterday, how it's a little bit odd that a leper still has a house and money, but, you know, if you contract leprosy after you're already rich, you don't lose all your money because of it. You kind of lose the ability to continue business depending on what you do. But he maybe has agents out in the field that are continuing to work for him. Bethany is, of course, where Lazarus was risen from the dead. And in this panel, Mary, who is Lazarus's brother, or sister, she's Lazarus's sister, she brings an alabaster box of precious ointment. So alabaster itself is a precious substance, and it's been crafted into a box. That means whatever's inside it is of value. In this instance, it's an ointment. And it probably has an ingredient that is valuable. Now you can see that they're at this dinner. Everybody's laying down. We've talked about this before. That either a young or an old Elvis, if he ever saw this particular comic, might have looked at this and wondered, is this how Jesus ate? Did Jesus lie down to eat? I mean, I guess he must have. That's how they all did it. But it's so strange because I would never lie down to eat like this. Now, I have known people that lie down and eat, but I don't think it's conducive to eating myself. I like to sit. Now, I know other people that like to stand while they eat. I don't especially like to stand. I like to sit and eat at a table, if possible. The other thing I notice about this panel is it has this oil lamp. And the lamp, it's kind of like a genie's lamp. So it's like a gravy bowl is the way that I would describe it today. But at the end where you pour the gravy, there's a wick that sticks down through there and into the oil that's held in the reservoir of the bowl. And then you light it on fire. So that's what keeps this burning all the time. And then because of the shape that it is, you could pour in more oil while it's still on fire, if you're careful. You got to be real careful. And here Mary anoints Jesus's head. So she's got this ointment and she's put it on his head. It probably makes you smell good. I don't know that it would have much other, at least the way they're showing it in this panel, she's just like dripping it on his head. And of course, you got to get it in through all that hair. So I don't think it's cleaning his hair. I think it's just, I don't think it's making his hair manageable so you can comb it or anything. It's just adding a nice smell to hopefully alleviate some of the other smells that probably all of these people have. Hi, Pat. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And the disciples murmur, this might have been sold and given to the poor. So they're indicating that they know that the ointment is valuable. They've noticed it's valuable. They're bringing it to Jesus' attention that this woman is basically rubbing money all over your body. And that's the way that they see it. They're seeing dollar signs. Now, of course, it wasn't dollars back then, but they're seeing dollar signs connected to what Mary is doing. And Jesus says, let her alone. She has done a good work. She did it for my burial. So Jesus acknowledges that Mary is honoring him and that she doesn't have, this is not clouding her from alignment, is the way that Joseph Benner would put this. That Mary is aligned, she's strongly aligned, and she has come to pay her respects to Jesus to show that she is aligned and that she does believe. And the expense of the item, it's a symbol of that Jesus is very important to her. More important than the wealth that's symbolized by the expensive ointment. The three that are looking on, the disciples, as well as the rest who have only seen the dollar signs that Mary has been rubbing onto Jesus's feet and dripping into his hair, that shows where their concern is. Their personalities are very focused on money. Now we know from, because we've already been through this particular story in the book of John itself, that at the Last Supper, Jesus reveals that Judas is carrying the money bag. So these other gentlemen do not have the burden of money at this moment. They don't really have to think about money. Everything's being provided as it needs to be provided, but they've been providing for themselves all their lives, and they can't stop thinking about providing. Judas is very, very concerned with it. That's why he's got to carry the money bag. The others are concerned enough to always be aware that Judas is carrying the money bag. Everyone, all of them are concerned enough about it to notice that Mary is using some very expensive ointment. It's very, very expensive. They notice it immediately. This is a fog that is being created by their personalities that keeps them from the truth of the I am. Now, it's not necessarily a full misalignment, because they're all looking right at Jesus. They are aligned. They're trying to understand what's happening. But here in this sheepfold of this dinner with Simon the leper, these disciples who understand Jesus better than anyone on earth except for Mary, they are unable to remove their mask of personality in order to absorb this lesson. That might be unfair. They might absorb it later, but they weren't able to see the truth of what was happening in front of them until Jesus points it out. At that moment, maybe they are able to take off their personality mask and take this lesson in. Maybe the conduit in the fog widens enough. And so I think there is a parallel and a reflection to Elvis's life here, because Elvis was surrounded by people. We could look at these three men in the picture as the inner circle. And there were others who came into proximity with Elvis, people who were not necessarily of the inner circle or who were new to the inner circle. We could think specifically of his female friends. We could say that Mary here, and again, Jesus is not Elvis, Elvis is not Jesus. We're only looking for patterns that Jesus exemplifies so that we can know, hey, this is the pattern. There was a lesson here. When I saw the pattern in the Bible, maybe that lesson applies to this pattern. But the pattern here is the men around Elvis would often see money as a transactional thing between Elvis and another person. And they would tell him things like, this person's only after you for your money. All they want is what they can get from you. Vernon would say these kind of things about the inner circle. So you could put one of the inner circle people here at Elvis's feet if this was Elvis instead of Jesus. And then one of these guys around would be Vernon. And he's seeing the money that's being transacted. We've heard that from all of the guys in their testimonies. When they looked at Elvis, they saw dollars being moved around. And it was a fog to the real person that Elvis was, to the friendship that these people truly had with Elvis. But it shows the fog that gets in the way that's created by materialism and money. And it was in between Elvis and all of his inner circle friends, because they all said things like this at some point. And Elvis was a very astute person. He'd read these portions of the Bible. He was good at looking for resonance, and so he might have seen these kind of parallels in his own life. And he did tell Vernon, when Vernon told him that these people are only after you for what they can get. Elvis told him something about, you only see what they need, what they want, but I see what they need. And that's not exactly what's happening in this panel, but there's a discernment happening where Jesus knows what the truth of Mary's heart is, and he's saying, you have misjudged her. That's the let her alone. That I know that what she does is love for me. And that's what Elvis is telling Vernon. I know that they do things in love for me, and that they have needs beyond that, and that's what I'm satisfying. And they're not necessarily material needs, but sometimes you get to these lessons through the money. And I think that Elvis was using money in this way at some times. And then we have Judas leaves the feast. So there's not a confrontation like we actually saw in the book itself from the Bible, but they've condensed this into Judas has determined to leave the feast. This still shows the shame that Judas feels because he's conflicted over Jesus, and it's about this money bag that he carries. It's not in this particular picture. It's probably hidden under one of his robes here that you can see that he's wearing. But the artist has not explicitly brought out the money bag. But it's that money bag that is fogging. It's the symbol of Judas's fog. And it's not only money that fogs Judas. That would be a very simplistic reading of Judas. He's a full, real person. There's a lot of stuff going on in Judas's mind, but the money was used as a very visible example, something that was materializing in the real world, hooked to his belt, that showed his fog. Somewhat like a rosary, but in reverse. It was a thing that brought him out of meditation, out of alignment. And it indicates that all relics are tools, and you've got to use them the right way. And in this panel, Judas goes to the council of the chief priests. And the chief priests rejoice to hear that Judas will betray Jesus. So Judas has come in. He says he knows Jesus. They probably recognize him as one of Jesus's men. Jesus has become very famous. So the men that are surrounding him, like the inner circle of Elvis, are becoming famous in their own right. Even before they wrote books, people who really knew Elvis, the fans who really watched Elvis closely, they knew these inner circle people. And so Judas is probably known when he shows up. And he's probably told them, my heart's troubled. I need to tell you, I know you're the religious authority. You've said we need to tell you things about Jesus, and these people are very happy. That's exactly what we've said. We need this information about Jesus, and a person that's close to him, that makes it very easy to identify and find him. You know, in these days, before photographs and television, they probably knew Jesus and Judas by their names. If one of them had been to one of Jesus's speeches, he probably knew Judas by sight. He might have known Jesus by sight, but that doesn't tell you where the man is. And if you're the only one and you don't happen to be there when they find him, so this makes it a lot easier. But Judas wants to know, what will you give me? These men would probably have given Judas anything. But this also reminds me of Red West when he told Elvis that he'd been in a boat with Steve Dunleavy. And that's when they made a deal with Rupert Murdoch. He didn't mention Rupert by name, but that's the guy with the money. He's the guy that was employing Steve, and he does say that he and Steve they're on a boat. That was probably a yacht. Something like this fine house or this fine building, maybe this is the temple, where they're at. Did it say where they were at? No, it's just the council of the chief priests, so some fine, nice place. And they made a deal in the boat, which is basically Red saying, how much will you give me? They covenant with him for 30 pieces of silver. So it's 30 pieces of silver. That's 30 ounces of silver today. Silver shot up a lot recently. It's been kind of volatile. An ounce about 10 years ago was like $15 or $25, depending on which day it was. Today, it's like $100. So this would be like $3,000 today. But a few years ago, it would have been less than $1,500. So that gives you somewhat of the range that this money was. And then it says, and from that time, he sought opportunity to betray him. And on the day of the unleavened bread, Jesus sends Peter and John to prepare and keep the Passover. Where shall we go? When you enter the city, you will find a man bearing a pitcher of water. So Jesus gives some very exact instructions here. Follow him into the house he enters. This is kind of a neat picture because they've got this building and it's got this outside stairway on it. I'm thinking in Tupelo they wouldn't have had a lot of outside stairways, and in Memphis I don't think they did either. And then underneath the stairway is an arch or a doorway that goes somewhere else. And there's also a tree, so this is like a courtyard. There's a window that you could possibly reach from the stairway. It would be difficult, but it's barred, like a jail cell. And inside this house, Jesus has told them, and tell the owner of the house, the master says, where is the guest chamber? And he will show you a large upper room furnished and prepared, and there make ready for us. So this room has 2 windows that look out. They have wooden shutters. There's a boy here that's opening the shutters. I'm assuming he is the son of the man who owns this place. The man who owns the place, he's got a pouch on his belt, which I assume is a bag for money, meaning that he has wealth and therefore he has this room available. He's carrying, it's either a couple of towels or maybe a tablecloth. So that shows a hosting, I think that he's a host. There's some containers for liquid and some dishes, some bowls on the table. So obviously there is the ability to eat here. There are what look like giant ottomans to me, or just kind of square benches or large rectangle benches. I think those are what you lay on when you eat. However, I guess you could sit on them. They just don't have a back and you could eat. But I think they're intended to be laid on like we've already seen. And this says, when the hour comes, Jesus and the disciples eat the Passover feast together. With desire, I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. So that didn't come out very clearly in the book of John either. So I'm assuming this is from another one of the Gospels. And Jesus is telling them at the beginning of the meal that he's going to be suffering at some point after this. And there are 12 people in this picture other than Jesus. So there are 12 disciples here. And it says an argument rises among them about who shall be greatest. So they're saying things like, I'll be the best disciple, or no, I'll be the number one disciple. And that again reflects in the life of Elvis, because his own inner circle, the men that in this pattern would be represented by the disciples, they bicker in the same way. They have this same kind of camaraderie and conflict going on between them all the time. And it's some of this that grows out of control, and this causes the fractures and the splits in this inner circle. And Elizabeth says that she was going to say that it was just like Elvis. So you see that resonance as well. And that, in a way, this is also a jockeying for position of who will be Elvis's right-hand man. And that's something that we saw really come out at his wedding, when the right-hand man, Red West, was pushed aside so that Elvis could make Marty Lacker the best man. And then some of this jockeying for position happened, and suddenly Marty was no longer in favor, and then Joe Esposito was the best man. And then compromises were made, and there were two best men, but Red West, he didn't get to come to the ceremony. And you can see that being played out right here in this panel. And that's part of the tension that, cracks this group going on for the next 10 years. And it's kind of really unfortunate, not just that Red spirals out of Elvis's life in this terrible way, but Marty doesn't even stick with the group through the end of the year. He's gone by the end of 67. Now he'll return later, but he's gone by the end of 67. Joe, he's still there, but he and Elvis have not gotten along for a while at that point. Joe is dependable, but he's no longer trustworthy. And that's hard to understand, but that's kind of the way that Elvis felt about Joe at that time. And I think right through to the end, once you lost that initial trust, Elvis knew who you were. So he could always trust you to be who you were, but that didn't mean he could trust you. I think that is something that a lot of people don't see clearly in Elvis. They see proximity. Well, Red was still there in 75 and in 76. He was, but he'd been on the outs for almost 2 years openly at that point. And so there were degrees of proximity even within the proximity. And these guys saw it, and then they bickered among each other like this. You could also see reflections of the slot car room. Elvis works hard to get this slot car room built because they all love playing slot cars. They keep going over to this place in the strip mall to play the slot cars. They spent a lot of money at it. They all got their own favorite car. Elvis puts in the track very first day. It's no fun anymore because they're all bickering and yelling and screaming so much about it. And Elvis has the whole thing ripped out. And in this panel, Jesus begins to wash the disciples' feet. And Peter says, "Thou shalt never wash my feet." Because Peter wants to show that he honors Jesus and that he places himself below Jesus. He's humble about that. Now, he's humble about that, but in this particular panel, this robe that Peter is wearing, it's a light orange with dark orange stripes. This is in the 1940s, but this looks like if ancient times were in the 1970s, this would have been a 1970s era ancient times robe. It is extremely 70s patterned, and although Peter might be humble about being lower than Jesus, this is not a humble kind of outfit to wear. So this is an interesting choice by the artist. And Jesus says, "If I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me." And so Jesus is saying, Peter, once again, we're at one of these crossroads where I've handed out knowledge and you've said, no, I don't like that knowledge. I'm going to let it pass me by, but I still think you're the greatest, Jesus. And that's not, that is alignment, but that is not moving forward in the spiral. We're not learning things. We're stuck somewhere. We're spiraling around a lesson, and it's okay to spiral. But Jesus doesn't have much time here. So he just says, if I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. You're resisting me again, Peter. We've talked about this. You've got to surrender. Peter, often his first inclination is to reject. He's kind of the rejecter in chief, but he's also the greatest believer, the rock. So when he rejects things, it's an indication that the others have also rejected the lesson. And not because they don't want the lesson, it's because they can't. They're not understanding the lesson. And so, therefore, they're going to have to spiral through it. And in this panel, it says, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. And so this is an indication that Peter has heard the message, that he understands, oh, I'm again trying to resist, and I meant to be open and to surrender. And so he drops to his knees to indicate the surrender. In this panel, he's on his knees, and he says, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. This is a very Elvis kind of thing to do, where once he understands what the mission is, he jumps in and says, let me do more than the mission. I'm going to go above and beyond this. And that's not exactly what Jesus asked for either. And sometimes you might be taking too much on yourself with that. But it's also showing the exuberance with which Peter wishes to serve the Lord. And in this panel, it says, ye call me Master and Lord, and ye say well, for so I am. But I am among you as he that serveth. And so Jesus is telling these 12 men that you have pain and suffering and happiness and joy, and I'm here to share all that, to feel it exactly the way that you do, to see the world through your human eyes, to understand the sequence of events as you perceive them, because that's not how I naturally perceive these events. I don't naturally have the feelings that the human personalities have. So Jesus has come to experience these things firsthand for himself and to share that experience with these others, so that they all know that they're together in this, that he's brought unity here to the realm of individuality. And he's reminding everyone that we're all gonna go back to unity, but here we've got to be individuals in order to accomplish the mission. And I've come to share that because I'm an individual. I've got a mission. It's about to happen. And then you're going to go forward and use what I've modeled. I think that's how Joseph Benner would have looked at this. And then Jesus reveals that one of you that eats with me shall betray me. Now, this is a very interesting panel because in the book of John, this isn't exactly what happened. I think in the book of John that we read, it was more that Peter just jumped up and said, I won't let that happen. He began into thoughts like that. But there was consternation. There was bewilderment. And I had said that they were all really looking into themselves to see if it could be them, because the book had also made clear that Jesus had given them a lesson, that they had all rejected portions of his teachings. And then Peter had exemplified that with the refusal to listen about the washing of the feet. And so then the lesson was made clear. And then all of these men are set up in their hearts to understand we ourselves have not understood everything, and we've, in some cases, subconsciously rejected these messages that we've been given, and that we've been struggling against them. And that means they could all be a betrayer. And so they say here in this panel, is it I? Am I the one? Is it me who will betray you? None of them want to face that possibility. At least 11 of them don't. One of them's already done things. And the disciples ask one of the disciples next to Jesus to ask who it is. Who is it, Jesus? Say that it's not me. And that disciple asked, Lord, who is it? And again, he's saying, say it's not me. Say it's one of these others. Point him out. And Jesus says, he that dips his hand with me in the dish. And so this is a little bit different as well. In the book of John, Jesus dipped a piece of bread in the sop and then handed it to Judas. And he's showing here a big bowl. And I guess that's the dish that holds the stuff that makes the sop, whatever the liquid is. And the sop, I think, is the bread. It sops up whatever that liquid is. And they're sharing big bowls of this in this picture. And so I assume that this is how they did eat back then. It's been researched probably by the people who wrote and then illustrated this comic book. Maybe that's brought out in the other Gospels more this way. And of course, it didn't really tell us what kind of vessel held the sop. Just that Jesus had dipped the bread in. Here it's showing that Judas is also dipping his own bread in, and that Jesus is just saying that he's sharing it with him. So maybe that's what was meant in John. If you translate it slightly differently, I don't know. But it's interesting. And Judas, he's got a very jutting chin in both of these pictures that gives him it gives him an evil look. Kind of a pointy, jutting chin that's amplified by his beard. And Jesus looks at Judas and he says, that you do quickly. And no man knew what Jesus meant by this. I feel like in the book of John, they did know. I mean, they didn't know explicitly what he would do, but they knew it was a betrayal. And Judas immediately goes out, and it was night. So Judas, according to Joseph Benner, walks into the darkness of his own solitude. That solitude is the opposite of unity. It's a place within yourself, but it's not your heart, because that's where the I am is. You've gone somewhere deep into yourself. You've turned away from God. You can't see the light. That's why it's dark. Now, the darkness is actually part of this illusion of fog you wrap around yourself, because the light's always there. God's always sending it through your divine shard, where each divine shard wrapped in a soul body, which is perfect, and then that is replicated here on the mortal plane in our imperfect mortal bodies. The soul body is the perfect vessel or the divine shard to project the divine attribute that it's supposed to project. And then that's translated through our imperfect mortal bodies. It's got to go through something mortal to make it here into the mortal plane. And that's what we're working to perfect, is that projection of that divine attribute. In this panel, Judas has willingly turned away from that. Now, he will unknowingly still serve God's will. But in his heart, in his own self, he believes that he is rejecting God. That's what he's trying to do. And he's walking into his own solitude. He's wrapped himself in darkness so he cannot see the light. And Jesus has sent him into this because eventually he'll have to turn around and come back. That is what happens when we go into misalignment. But the misalignment, especially when you're not following or trying to follow God's will consciously, misalignment is very painful. It's suffering. There are lessons learned, but they could have been learned in different ways. And then Jesus says, all of you shall fail this night because of me. And so I'm sure these 11 disciples, they're very relieved at this moment. The betrayer has been identified and he's left. That just leaves all the good guys. And then Jesus says, hey, guess what? Each one of you is going to do something. Yeah, it's going to be something. It's not going to be Judas level, but other places in the Bible have indicated that all sins, which might be thought of, especially by Joseph Benner, as forms of misalignment, especially willful misalignment, that they're all equal in the eyes of God. And Jesus is telling these 11, I know you feel relieved at this moment, but you're all capable of what Judas has done. You haven't fallen prey to Judas's specific, they would call them devils in the King James Bible, but we might think of them as temptations. But that you each have your own temptations and your own issues and your own fear. And it's going to drive you to do something tonight that you will later feel shame for. And I think Jesus is trying to tell them now, when you feel that shame, it's the signpost to turn around and realign. Because the shame will do more to turn you into misalignment than anything else. And so he's, in a way, he's forgiving them up front. I already know you're going to do these things. I've already come to terms with it. And Peter jumps up and he says, Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death. And Jesus says, this night before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. So Peter again resists the lesson, says it can't be true, falls back into the same pattern he's always had of, Jesus, I'm the rock, I believe everything you say, but I'm not going to believe this one. That's kind of Peter's pattern. And Jesus shatters that. He's not very gentle about it. He says, tonight, you're going to do it 3 times. You yourself are going to be Judas 3 times. And Jesus doesn't lie, so Peter knows this is the truth. He can't deny that. He can't argue back and forth about it. He can try once or twice, but he can't really do it. Because Peter is the rock, and he does believe in Jesus. But that's where we've got to leave it for today, because we've come to the end of the hour. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being here and spending that hour with me, whether you're live or on the replay. And I'm going to play a song to send us out of here. This is His Heart's Desire. You all keep on taking care of business.
His time came too early, the curtain fell too fast. Before he was ready, before we could grasp the man behind the myth, the ache behind the fame. He wanted something simple, not fortune, not acclaim. 6 is 3, the threats came down like rain. He spoke of love, not fear, through the shadow and the strain. I wanna live to be old, he said with quiet grace, to remember her love and see our children's face. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a throne. He wanted a family, a place to call home, to be a good man with a heart that could rest, to know he was loved and he'd given in his best. No mansion in the sky, no diamond parade, just the warmth of a hand and the life they made. A whisper of laughter, a child's sleepy sigh, that was the dream he carried inside. Didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a throne. He wanted a family, a place to call home. To be a good man with a heart that could rest. To know he was loved and he'd given it